Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true, disturbing stories about creepy encounters and dark legends from Texas. These stories will make you think twice before driving alone at night in Texas. But before we begin, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now, let's start. I was 29 when I first got stuck with the old Alton file. It was supposed to be easy. A cleanup job, nothing more. That's how my manager described it, with a half shrug like he was tossing me busy work. He even called it a ghost docket, which sounded more like a joke than an assignment. The story was simple enough. Some abandoned township linked to Old Alton hadn't paid property taxes in over 50 years. My job in the archival division of the State Revenue Office was to scan old records, label them, and send them off to permanent storage. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Usually the files were dead paper trails, counties that no longer existed, towns swallowed up by bigger cities, settlements that had faded into history. Most of the time I spent my days staring at yellow deeds and faded census lists, but Old Alton wasn't like the others. It hadn't been swallowed up. It hadn't even been marked as dissolved. It just stopped appearing on maps one day, as though someone had erased it. The last official entry was from 1972. After that, silence. No foreclosure records. No census updates. Not even a note that the township had been vacated. The only surviving material was a stack of ledgers, mailed directly from Old Alton Revenue Hall, postmarked with a zip code that no longer exists in the system. I was told to drive out there, gather whatever was left, scan the contents, and bring the files back. Straightforward. Except it wasn't. No one in the office had ever actually been to Old Alton. There were no photographs of the Revenue Hall. No clear directions. I had to call Gwen, a retired auditor who'd worked Denton County cases in the 80s. Her voice crackled through the line as she gave me instructions, half muttered, like she was reading them from memory. She named roads that didn't show up on GPS, dirt tracks that sounded like they belonged in another century. "You'll know you're close when the trees stop growing," she said. I chuckled. She didn't. It took me 5 hours to reach what was left of Old Alton. The town was barely a skeleton. 2 collapsed barns, an empty stone foundation, and 1 brick building still standing. Across the faded facade, black letters spelled Alton Revenue Hall. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything felt like time had simply frozen. Paper stacked on desks, typewriters resting with sheets still rolled inside, shelves packed with metal-bound ledgers stamped with dates from decades past, even as far back as the early 1900s. The strangest thing was the air. It didn't smell musty or rotten. It didn't smell like anything at all. The only piece of furniture that seemed intact was a steel desk in the back office, bolted into the floor. Beneath it, I noticed a seam in the floor, a square outline in the concrete like a hidden hatch, but I didn't touch it. Not then. I set up my scanner and started with the property reports, the census logs, the tithe declarations. That's when I first noticed the name. Every so often, tucked between ordinary entries, was a line with no numbers, no dates, no amounts. Just receiver, Washburn. The handwriting shifted across decades, but the name never changed. No title, no explanation. It was written like an office designation, as if Washburn were a department. Sometimes it appeared 2 or 3 times on the same page. At first I thought it was some archaic shorthand, maybe a lazy way of marking write-off. But the longer I scanned, the stranger the entries became. One livestock report listed 3 goats to Washburn. A widow's estate transfer had no land or property at all, just the name written neatly at the bottom. I flagged the entries, planning to ask about them later. By evening, I drove 30 miles out to the nearest motel. Old Alton didn't have cell towers, phone lines, or even electrical poles. It was as if the place had been surgically removed from the modern grid. The motel clerk was chatty, the kind who liked to ask where you'd been. When I mentioned Old Alton, his face tightened. "Wasn't that the place with the tithe thing?" he asked. I admitted I didn't know. He shrugged, but kept his eyes on me a second longer than felt comfortable. "They used to say the dead paid taxes longer than the living out there," he muttered. I laughed. He didn't. That night, in my room, I laid the scanner on the desk, zipped in its case. Around midnight, it started beeping, slow, rhythmic, like a metronome. I hadn't plugged it in. I hadn't even turned it on. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, the sound stopped. The lights flickered once, and I heard something scrape across the ceiling above me, except I was on the top floor. The next morning, I drove back to Old Alton. The building felt colder. In the back, on a lower shelf, I found ledgers I hadn't noticed before, small, tied with twine, labeled special entries. Every page was blank except for a date and the words, "Auditor present." The date was yesterday's. The ink looked fresh. I opened another book. Same thing, different date. Still, auditor present. My scanner had no record of them at all. That's when I looked again at the hatch under the steel desk. The bolts were rusted, but the concrete around them had scratches, like something had pried it open from below. I knew better, but curiosity is a stupid thing. I removed the bolts. The hatch lifted with a hollow pop and a wave of air that smelled wrong. I shone my flashlight down. A concrete shaft stretched below, no ladder, just a drop into shadow. At the bottom sat a stone table. On it, burned books, and carved into the wall behind them, golden letters, clean and unworn. RECs or Washburn. My light flickered. Then it died. I scrambled back up and slammed the hatch shut. When I reached the front, the door of the revenue hall was closed. I was certain I had left it open. I pushed it wide and stepped outside. That's when I saw him, or thought I did. A thin man sitting motionless in the back seat of my car. He wore an old-fashioned collar and a black coat. I blinked. The seat was empty. But when I opened the door, the inside of the car was ice cold. The windshield was fogged from the inside. I didn't stop driving until I reached the motel. I sent in my notes, attached what I had scanned. That was my last night near Old Alton. I never finished the assignment. The state quietly closed the file. I didn't want to know more. 3 weeks later, a certified envelope arrived at my house. No return address. Inside was a single receipt. Tax settlement, paid in full. It had my name and one other line. Receiver, Washburn. I burned it that night. My shift at the Travis County Archive started at 6 in the evening. I handled old land deeds, probate files, and tax records for properties stretching back to when Texas was still a republic. Boxes stacked around my desk were stamped with names I didn't recognize, some scrawled in fading ink, others typed on yellowed paper. It was routine, slow work, but the county paid me to scan and log every page. By the time the building emptied for the night, I was always alone. That evening, the stacks were higher than ever, records of disputed ranch lands from the hill country. My desk had only a narrow strip of space left, just enough for the scanner in my laptop. The rest was buried under envelopes tied with string and receipts that curled like dried leaves. Even my water bottle was jammed into a corner, sweating quietly beside a stack of ledger books. The air was stale from decades of dust trapped in boxes no one had opened in generations. I cracked my knuckles, rolled my shoulders, and started with a stack labeled DB 1873 tax roll. I figured DB was an abbreviation for a town name, didn't think much of it. Opened the first manila folder and started scanning. Some of the entries were handwritten, others printed, but they all followed the same rhythm. Name, acreage, amount owed. An hour passed like that, just me, the documents, and the soft hiss of the scanner warming up again and again. The stillness around me felt dense, the kind of silence that amplifies small sounds. Every time I clicked the mouse or adjusted a crooked sheet, it echoed louder than it should have. Still, I was focused enough not to care, until one of the envelopes shifted. I heard it first. A faint scrape across the surface of my desk. I looked up fast. One of the manila envelopes had moved forward about an inch. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds, waiting to see if it would move again. It didn't. I told myself maybe my elbow nudged the desk or the envelope slid from the slope of the paper pile, but the desk was level and I hadn't touched it. I pressed my fingers flat on the desk and exhaled through my nose. Just focus. Probably nothing. I leaned back over the scanner, lined up the next form, and heard something else. A coin, sharp and sudden, it spun with a thin clink across the wood. I jerked my head up. A penny wobbled in a lazy circle before dropping flat near the center of the desk. There hadn't been a penny there before. I hadn't seen one in any of the folders. Everything I handled was paper, no coins, no metal. I stared at it, then slowly pushed my chair back and stood. Walked around the desk, checked the floor, the open boxes, even the envelope that had shifted. Nothing else out of place. I turned to check the window at the far side of the room. Still locked. The building's windows were sealed shut, old-style cranks that hadn't worked in years. The air was dead still, no sign of a draft. But when I turned back toward the desk, the penny had moved. It now sat precisely in the middle of a receipt bundle I hadn't touched yet. A cold wash ran down my arms. I sat again, slower this time, not taking my eyes off the coin. I reached for the next document but fumbled the corner. My fingers trembled slightly. I shook my head, told myself to keep going. Ignore it, just scan. I tried. For 5 minutes, I managed to keep my focus. But then came the sound from the other chair. Not creaking, not movement. A low vibration. It started like a hum but deeper. A guttural growl that swelled into a full-bodied noise. It didn't come from the walls. It didn't come from beneath. It came from the wooden chair across the desk. The sound was physical. I felt it press through the table and into my chest. It made my ribs ache. My hand jerked, and the scanner lid fell shut with a thud. I pushed back fast, my chair scraping hard across the tile. The growl deepened once more, then stopped as if someone had flipped off a switch. The silence that followed was wrong. It felt stretched, tense. I forced myself to look at the chair. It was empty, but the desk wasn't the same. The papers were moving, not fluttering from a breeze, sliding, stacking themselves, envelopes unfolding, pages arranging as if something was sorting through them methodically. I didn't move, just watched. The penny rattled suddenly, jolting to life. It skittered across the desk and stopped directly in front of the chair that had growled, right where a hand would be if someone had placed it down. My scalp tightened. I reached behind me, hand groping for the desk lamp. I snapped it on. The bulb flared harsh white. Everything froze. Papers flattened. Envelopes stilled. The penny stayed where it was. But the air in the room thickened, like I'd stepped into something heavy and old. My skin crawled. I backed away from the desk, eyes never leaving the papers, then bolted from the chair. I checked every room in the building. The document room, the hallway, the storage closet, the tiny bathroom with the bad overhead light, all empty. No sign of life, no open doors, no footprints, nothing. When I came back to my desk, the sight made me stop short. The penny was no longer in front of the chair. It was now placed neatly on a file I hadn't opened yet. Devil's Backbone, confiscated property, 1873. I recognized the name. Devil's Backbone was more than a road or a stretch of rocky hills. Locals called it cursed. Ranchers claimed livestock vanished. Hikers talked about sudden shifts in time, an hour lost in seconds, or found somehow after dark. There were stories of Confederate soldiers still seen patrolling. Lights where no cabin had ever stood. My grandmother used to warn us never to stop on the road at night. I never listened. Until that moment, I hadn't requested those files. They weren't on my docket. Someone must have misfiled them. Or worse, brought them here deliberately. I grabbed the entire pile, Devil's Backbone, tax rolls, deeds, receipts. Didn't even organize them. I shoved them into a document box and sealed it with packing tape. I didn't bother logging the ID numbers. Didn't update the inventory sheet. I just needed the documents gone. I didn't switch off the lamp. Didn't touch the empty chair. Didn't take my water bottle. I left everything else behind, just carried the box in both arms, fast walking through the corridor, breath tight in my chest. I exited through the loading dock. Outside, the lot was empty, lit only by a yellow security lamp that flickered every few seconds. The main lobby was closed, but the post-intake slot was still open for night drops. I crossed the lot and slid the box through the chute. I didn't care if it was misfiled or delayed. I just wanted it out of my hands. Inside my car, I didn't start the engine right away, just sat gripping the wheel, knuckles white. I felt a tightness in my chest that didn't ease until I was halfway home. Even then, I didn't sleep. I left the lights on in every room, kept the closet doors shut tight. Didn't open my bag again until morning. The disciplinary notice came a week later. Failure to complete assigned scans, missing tax files, unrecorded box logged into post-return system. I accepted the penalty without contest. No fine or reprimand could touch what I experienced that night. Whatever I scanned, whatever I touched, it was never meant to be disturbed. And I made sure I never touched another file from Devil's Backbone again. I'd taken a part-time job in a small Texas town, in a tax office on Bellevue Street. The building sat wedged between a flickering pawn shop and a nail salon whose acetone odor clung to passing air. From the street, you barely noticed it. Just another flat-roofed unit, dusty windows, a faded sign reading Tax and Accounting. Inside, it was 3 cramped rooms, the reception area with a squeaky counter, a filing room behind it, and a small back office. Filing cabinets lined most walls, their surfaces scarred and dusty. The whole place gave off the sense that someone had simply repurposed an old structure, leaving traces of its past rather than erasing them. Here's what locals told me. The structure had been a bank in the 1940s. There had been teller windows with iron bars, brass fixtures, vault doors so heavy that no one dared move them. When the bank closed decades ago, the vault remained sealed in the basement. All renovations since then had skirted the original structure. No one touched the subterranean vault or repurposed that part. That detail came up often with clients when they sat in the waiting area. They liked to recount rumors of secret stashes, missing deposit boxes, of debtors disappearing after failing to repay loans. They whispered about cursed money buried near the Brazos River. A frequent local legend told of a collector, some itinerant agent, who had once passed through Texas carrying ledgers and never left. These stories floated in the background, half jokes, half warnings. To me, they were background noise. I showed up at 9, set up my desk, plugged in computer, shuffled forms, and left when I was done. I didn't believe in ghosts. I believed in tax codes, deductions, ledgers. At first it was almost imperceptible, a light tap, a gentle knock, like fingernails on wood. It seemed to come from the cabinet directly behind the front door. Every time a client entered, the door would hit that same cabinet with a dull thunk. I shrugged it off. Old buildings creak, doors settle. Then one day I unlocked the office before anyone else arrived. I stepped through the front door and noticed papers scattered on the floor beside that cabinet. That was alarming enough. I remembered placing them in neat piles the night before. I collected them, shoved them back, assumed a janitor or wind had displaced them. But it happened again and again. Sometimes the knocking was faint, other times bold, each rap sharp and deliberate. I resisted panic. I told myself, must be plumbing behind the walls, air in pipes, temperature shifts. I kept working. One afternoon, a woman walked in to file her taxes. She sat across from me, pen in hand, glancing between lines of her forms and something behind me. I continued typing, clicking keys, asking her standard questions. Then she broke the silence, her voice quiet, matter-of-fact. "There's a woman near that cabinet. She's been waiting a long time for something that was never paid." I flinched. I turned, but saw nothing. She didn't elaborate. She signed her papers, collected her documents, and left. I sat frozen for a moment, heart hammering. When I resumed work, the knocking sounded louder, like rhythmic tapping, slowly building. Clients began tracking their eyes toward the cabinet mid-conversation. Once, convinced it was a prank from coworkers, I flung the cabinet open while a client watched. Inside, nothing out of the ordinary. Ledgers, envelopes, calculators, boxes of receipts. But the client's face drained of color, and he excused himself quickly. One afternoon, our youngest staff all pulled out phones loaded with Ghost app software. They placed them facing that cabinet. All screens lit up red dots hovering over the wood. They asked if someone was there. Silence. Then one asked a name. All phones displayed ledger. After that, no one volunteered to take late shifts. My supervisor was a skeptic. Practical, no nonsense. One morning, he came in close to dawn, bleary-eyed. He admitted to me he stayed late the previous night, finishing forms. He said he heard children laughing somewhere in the corridor, hallway voices. He thought maybe the back door was open. He followed the laughter toward our office with lights off, door ajar. He claimed he heard whispering, then sudden bursts of giggling. When he flipped on the lights, there was no one there. But the cabinet door stood wide open. He fled. When someone like him who disbelieves such things confesses to fear, I knew things were worsening. 2 mornings in a row, I arrived to see the cabinet wide open. The front door bumped it, swinging it further. I shut it, tried the knob. It wouldn't turn. I called the building manager. He told me the cabinet had not been locked since bank days. He dug through old keys, some stamped with the bank's name in brass. None fit. He tried pliers, twisting, prying. Nothing. Probably need a locksmith, he muttered. That same afternoon, a couple sat across me doing deduction forms. All 4 of us were aware of what had happened earlier. Then I heard the distinct sound of a lock turning, a slow, measured click. The cabinet creaked open a few inches. No one moved. The woman gasped softly. She's still here. I forced myself to finish the meeting. When they left, I approached the cabinet and pushed the door open. Everything inside was normal, no disturbances, no missing items. I shut it again and turned the knob. This time it spun freely, as if it had never been stuck. That night I stayed behind, lugging in my laptop. I positioned it in the corner, lens aimed square at that cabinet. I hit record. I left it running whenever I remained at the office. Over days, I noticed oddities in footage. One file, too large to open properly, like it recorded continuously for hours. Another, it cut off precisely at midnight, though the power had stayed on. Sometimes it glitched for a few seconds, blacking out. I never parsed through all of it. I saved the files in a folder I never opened. The knocking became more insistent. It sometimes rapped midday while I served clients, startling them. Clients would pause, mid-signature, glance back, whisper, "Did you hear that?" One client refused to sit near the cabinet, asked to move. Staff swore they saw movement shadows shifting behind wood grain, though when I raced over, nothing was there. At times, I felt a presence behind me while I entered data, though every glance back met only the cabinet face. The knocking sometimes morphed, wood thumps changing to sliding sounds, like something pulling along the surface. Some nights, I'd wake to an uneasy feeling, convinced someone watched from that cabinet's direction. I avoided staying late. I refused overtime shifts. The office was just outside Henderson, Texas, one of those stretches where the road gives way to cracked parking lots and faded signs. A dying strip mall sat beside the highway, its storefronts hollowed out and sun-bleached. Our tax prep service was the last tenant holding on. To the left was a shuttered Mexican restaurant with chairs still stacked on tables behind the dusty glass. To the right, a nail salon whose windows were covered in newspapers and peeling tape. I had taken the job after moving from Galveston, trying to reset my life in a place where nobody knew me. I figured taxes were stable work, and I didn't mind the numbers, but I was the newest hire, so I got the shifts no one else wanted. That meant late nights, usually alone, closing up long after the sun had vanished behind the pine trees. The office was plain and colorless, just gray carpet, beige walls, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Desks in rows, filing cabinets along the walls. A copier in the corner that moaned when it ran, a coffee machine that never worked right. There was an old rumor floating around, something they called the ghost of the returns. They told me, half laughing, that it haunted the place every tax season. Folders out of place, strange balances in client records, forms for people who shouldn't exist. I laughed too at first, but none of them stayed past 8. They all had excuses: kids, commutes, dinner plans. So I stayed, and over time little things started to shift. One night I locked every drawer, double-checked each one, and left for the restroom. When I came back, one was open, just a crack. A folder half slid out like it had been tugged gently. I figured I missed it. Fatigue, maybe. Another night, I left a pile of returns on my desk, only to find them in the break room the next morning. No one claimed to move them. The others laughed it off, told me the ghost was just reorganizing. But the more it happened, the harder it became to dismiss. I started second-guessing everything. Lock a drawer, test the latch, walk away. Come back, it's open. Sometimes the copier would shudder to life with no one touching it. I'd hear the mechanical grind, go over and find a blank page in the tray. One time I came in early and found a stack of forms already printed. Everyone filled out halfway. No client names, no social numbers, just lines filled in, faintly typed, and always stopping before the signature. I asked my supervisor. She waved it off. Said the old server sometimes auto-generated blanks from templates. But she didn't look me in the eye. Then came March, that last stretch before the filing deadline. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I had brought in tacos from the place down the road and they forgot the salsa, which irritated me more than it should have. I worked through most of the evening, filing joint returns, checking deductions, flipping through pages until the numbers started to blend. At around 11, I shut down the computers, turned off the lamps, and did my usual round locking cabinets, checking drawers, pulling my chair in. Then I saw the folder. It was lying on the front counter, manila, stuffed thick. The tab read Tisdale. I didn't recognize the name. No one by that name had filed through us this year. I opened it, expecting some old record that got misplaced. But the pages inside weren't standard. Each one had a handwritten date across the top. Not birth dates, not tax years, just single dates. I skimmed the first few, then I froze. The dates were familiar. They matched deaths I'd seen in the Henderson Daily News, small obituaries I glanced over while eating breakfast at the diner. People from this area, old farmers, retired teachers, a child who drowned in a lake west of town. I closed the folder and shoved it into the nearest drawer, locked it, tested the latch, turned to go, turned to go. The folder was back on the counter, same spot, same tab. I opened it again, hands sweating. Now each page had a Texas address typed at the top. Tyler, Kilgore, Athens. Then on the last sheet, I saw mine, my exact street, my house number, even the unit letter. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag and bolted through the back exit. The air outside was dead still. My car sat alone under a flickering light. I dug for my keys, hands shaking. Then the copier started, inside the office. That low, mechanical growl, followed by a rhythmic slap of paper, over and over. I should have kept walking, but I didn't. I went back in. Each sound of the copier louder than it had any right to be. Inside, the tray was stacked with pages. Every sheet was the same. A standard state return, except the signature line at the bottom. It had my name, not typed, not scanned, handwritten, perfectly. My loops, my slant, the exact way I crossed my T. I didn't sign those. I hadn't touched a pen. I backed away and reached for my pocket. No keys. My eyes scanned the room. There on the counter, right next to the folder. I stepped forward, slow, cautious. As I reached for the keys, the folder slid sideways on its own. It fell, landed open. Pages scattered in a perfect ring around my feet. Every single form had my name typed in, under every line. As preparer, as client, as spouse, as dependent. Then the noise started. All the cabinet drawers snapped open. Every single one. Files spilled out. Not messily. Neat stacks. Organized. Precise. Each topped with a blank form already filled with my name. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stared. Then I turned and ran. Locked the door behind me. Started the car with trembling hands. I didn't even check the mirrors until I hit the highway. No one followed. No lights. No folder. But something stayed with me. The next day I came in early. The office looked untouched. Drawers closed. Copier off. No folder. No stacks. No evidence. I told the manager what happened. She sipped her coffee and nodded. Said I wasn't the first. She told me about a man years back who claimed his returns kept changing, like the system was rewriting them. A woman who heard her dead husband's name called from the break room. She said the office had always been strange, that it was built on top of an old post office, then a DMV, then a doctor's clinic. Each one closed within a decade. She called it just part of East Texas charm. Laughed and went back to checking invoices. I finished the season, but I never stayed past sundown again, not once. If something wasn't done, I left it for the morning, filed what I could, cashed my final check, and never returned. I moved again the following year, west toward El Paso. I work remotely now. I was 17 when I first heard about that busted old gas station off Farm Road 917, just a little past the railroad cut south of a town called Darlin, Texas. Everybody in Harlan County had their own version of what was wrong with it. Some folks leaned into the supernatural, said it was haunted, cursed, maybe both. There was one guy at the feed store, old enough to remember the original pumps, who swore it was built on top of a Comanche burial ground, and that's why the vines wouldn't stop crawling in through the windows. Another swore a mechanic burned to death in the service bay back in the 50s, and you could still hear his boots dragging across the concrete. But for most of us, it wasn't anything that spooky. It was just a forgotten spot outside of town where Dane Keller ran his side business. Now, Dane wasn't a ghost. He was very much alive, very much loud, and very much the kind of guy who could sell you your own shirt while convincing you it came with free Wi-Fi. He transferred into Westlake High our junior year and started making waves almost immediately. He had this look, like someone tried to dress a con artist as a cowboy. Scuffed boots that probably never touched a stirrup, jeans with fake mud baked into the hems, one of those giant rodeo belt buckles that looked like it belonged on a wrestling champ, and a hat he never wore, just let hang off the back of his neck like a hood ornament. But he didn't need the hat. His real costume was confidence. Dane had this smooth way of talking, like every sentence was part of some bigger trick you didn't know you were part of yet. People either loved him or got completely steamrolled by him. By March, he was basically running a full-blown black market out of the trunk of a dented white Crown Vic he parked 2 blocks off campus. Burner phones, pirated satellite cards, jailbroken tablets, knockoff Apple Watches, even fake parking permits for seniors who couldn't get one, all passed through his hands. Some of the teachers knew what he was doing, or at least knew enough to avoid asking questions. Most looked the other way, except for Mr. Landry. Long-term sub, history guy, strict, a little desperate for respect. He tried to play tough and ended up buying a fake hunting lease from Dane for $500. I saw the printout once. Coffee stains, fake signature, even a phony cattle brand that Dane made using a heat gun and a bent paperclip. Landry tried to use it on public land and got caught by game wardens within 15 minutes. He got fired on the spot. Dane, 2-day suspension. Came back on Wednesday like nothing happened. Had a donut in one hand and a new phone case in the other, smiling like he'd just won the lottery. That was Dane. Everything slid right off him. But something shifted around April. He stopped selling at school. No more burner phones during lunch. No more whispered transactions behind the gym. No more disappearing into bathroom stalls with freshmen and coming out 5 minutes later counting cash. He just vanished from his usual spots. Turned out, he was spending all his time out at that Texaco station. The place was a real dump. No pumps. No glass in the windows. Canopy rusted through. Office door half off the hinges. It looked like a movie set for a place the main character was supposed to die, but it had one thing Dane loved. It was ignored. Nobody went there. No cops, no kids, no cameras. Just a crumbling shell and a view of the tracks. I only found out he was using it because I saw a faint flicker through the office window one night. I was heading home from a friend's place, took the back roads out of habit. There was this pulse of light just once, like a flashlight dying, and I slowed down. Didn't stop though. Didn't feel like getting caught in whatever he was up to. But the next day, curiosity got the better of me. I headed out there, parked down the road just in case, walked the rest of the way. The air around that place always felt a little stale, like you were walking through someone else's bad memory. When I peeked into the old service bay, Dane was inside, crouched over a milk crate with wires running everywhere. It looked like the inside of a busted UFO. There were piles of coaxial cable, old CB radios cracked open on the floor, boxes full of TV tuners, satellite dishes leaning against the walls. He was soldering something to a half-melted board, tongue poking out like he was painting. I asked what he was building. He didn't even glance up, said, "Ghost repeater." I blinked. He grinned, clearly loving the confusion on my face. "It's a radio trick," he said. "You loop audio through dead frequencies. Make it sound like voices from nowhere. Stuff that's already happened. Emergency calls. Trut chatter, screaming if you want." I laughed a little, asked why anyone would want that. He looked up then, said, "Because it messes with people." That was it, no punchline. No follow-up, just that flat stare. That was the first time something about him didn't sit right with me. This wasn't like unlocking someone's fire stick. It was mean. He showed me more of his setup, said he was in this locked forum now. Just guys like him, ex-military types, survivalists, fringe tech heads. They posted schematics, dumped firmware, shared recordings of intercepted calls. And more than anything, they traded gear. Except Dane didn't trade. He tricked. He'd post some fake claim, say he had a North Korean signal booster or an old CIA field transceiver, then offer to trade for something rare. They'd send it, he'd ghost. Told me he'd gotten over 20 packages in 1 month. He even had a shelf in the office lined with unopened boxes. Treated them like trophies. I remember him holding up this heavy customized tuner with some guy's initials burned into the metal. Said it probably took him weeks to build. Then he dropped it into a plastic bin like it was a broken toaster. That was the last time I went out there. He tried to give me a hacked CB unit for free. Said it could pick up old police channels from Louisiana if the sky was right. I turned it down. Didn't want any part of it anymore. I figured, worst case scenario, someone would track him down online, maybe dox him, or report him to a mod. He'd move on, like always. But this time was different. 2 weeks later, a package showed up at the Texaco. Plain brown box, sealed tight, no markings. He found it after school, took it inside. I wasn't there. Jamie was. She'd gone to scream at him over something. I think it was a rumor he'd started about her sister hooking up with a coach. She didn't even make it inside. Told me later that Dane was already slicing through the box when she got there. Said he looked excited, like he was expecting gold. There was another box inside, smaller, wrapped with tape so tight it looked shrink-wrapped. She said he grinned, started opening it. Then came the sound. She didn't call it an explosion. Said it was more like a hollow, deep thump, like someone hit an empty fuel tank with a hammer. Then smoke, black, oily, chemical-smelling. She said it reeked like burnt copper and something wet and ugly, meat maybe. She ran. Didn't look back. Nobody saw Dane after that. Hazmat showed up, ATF too. Sheriff's deputies blocked the whole area off with crime tape and concrete barricades. They combed the office for days. Eventually they found what was left. Fragments of a directional blast, wired into a gutted radio. It had been designed to go straight up the moment the box was opened. Clean, efficient, lethal. He died instantly. Didn't leave much to bury. His parents didn't speak at the service. Barely even moved. The local news ran the story for about a week before it vanished. Nobody really wanted to touch it. Too strange. Too specific. 6 days later, they arrested the guy who sent it. Retired Army comms tech from a place called Monito Ridge, up in northern Montana. Ham radio operator. Lived off-grid. Had a basement filled with gear, notebooks, flagged forum threads, and a detailed log of every fake deal Dane had pulled. He never said a word in court. Took a plea. 20 years, no parole. That was it. End of the official story. But people in Darlin still talk about the Texaco. Say if you park near the service bay after midnight and start flipping CB channels, you'll catch things that don't make sense. Snippets of old dispatches. Morse code that doesn't match anything current. Once, someone claimed they heard crying. Soft, drawn out like it was coming from inside the walls. And one time, just once, someone picked up a laugh. Young, cocky, too familiar. Talking about ghost repeaters. I haven't gone back. I'd been doing long-distance runs for about a year by then. It helped keep my head clear. Some people do yoga, some meditate. I ran. I liked the quiet, the rhythm of it, the way everything in my brain sort of lined up after a few miles. But that Saturday, I needed something more than just my usual neighborhood loop. I wanted open space, something that felt a little unfamiliar. So I drove out past Oak Ridge, a town you'd probably miss if you blinked. Just beyond it, there's a stretch of road locals call Widow's Spine. It's this long, winding ridge road that cuts through hills of limestone and cedar. You've got cliffs on one side, drop-offs on the other, and almost no one drives it except for ranchers or folks taking the scenic route by accident. Growing up, I'd heard plenty about the place. Stories get passed around. People vanishing out there, like full-on disappearing. No wreckage, no tracks. Just gone. Old men at the diner talked about hearing drums or phantom bugles, like Civil War soldiers still marching through the hills at night. Others said they heard crying. Not coyotes or owls or anything like that. Just plain, human crying that echoed off the rocks and didn't come from any direction you could point to. I always figured it was just bored small-town talk. Teenagers trying to spook each other, or maybe some folks hitting the bottle a little too early in the day. I wasn't looking for ghosts. I just wanted the mileage. Widow's Spine gave me almost 10 uninterrupted miles. No lights, no cars, no people. So that morning, I packed up my gear, threw a water bottle in the truck, and headed out before the sun was fully up. I pulled over at a rusted cattle gate that looked like it hadn't been opened in years, parked on the shoulder, and started stretching. The air felt dry. Still, there was that faint, dusty smell of sun-baked cedar and limestone, the kind that gets into your nose and stays there. I laced up, popped in my earbuds, but decided against playing anything. Just wanted the sound of my feet hitting gravel. That steady crunch that sort of hypnotizes you after a while. The first few miles were everything I wanted. It was just open road, switchbacks curling through patches of rock and trees. I passed a few broken fence posts leaning like drunk old men, a cracked-up stock tank filled with weeds, and what looked like the skeleton of a billboard, just a rusted frame sticking up into the sky with nothing on it. It felt like I was running through someone's forgotten memory. Everything was faded and quiet. Around mile 5, I started to slow. Not because I was tired, because I saw movement. Up on the ridge to my right, a little above the road, 2 figures were walking. At first I thought they were dogs, maybe a couple of strays following each other. They were pacing together side by side, dipping in and out of the brush like they were tracking something. I stopped running, pulled out my phone like I usually do when something catches my eye, and zoomed in. That's when I noticed their legs. They bent the wrong way. Not like an injury or deformity, more like their joints were just arranged incorrectly. Their knees pointed forward and sideways at the same time. And their heads. Something about them was all wrong. Too stretched out in the front, but not long enough to be coyotes or wolves. It was like someone had taken the general idea of a dog and built it from memory, but didn't quite get the proportions right. Their fur looked dusty, almost gray, like it had been rolled in ash. I took a couple more steps trying to get a cleaner angle for a photo. Then I heard rocks scatter behind me. It was a sharp sound, very distinct. I whipped around fast, adrenaline already kicking in, and saw someone standing just off the road, half hidden in the cedar brush. This wasn't one of the creatures from the ridge. It was upright, tall, easily 6.5, maybe 7 feet. I could see most of it. Grayish skin stretched too tight over long, bony limbs. Its arms hung low, fingers almost brushing its knees. The head tilted forward, like it had been leaning in to watch me before I turned around, and the mouth, it was open, not wide, just slightly, like someone who was about to speak and then forgot what they were going to say. But no sound came out. For a second, just 1 second, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone playing a prank, a guy in a costume, some creepy hunter with a messed up sense of humor, but there were no vehicles parked nearby, no gear, no other sounds. And when I turned back to the ridge, the pale figures were gone. I don't mean they walked off. I mean they weren't there, like I had imagined them, or like they'd never existed at all. Then the figure in the brush took a step forward, and its shoulder made this awful wet cracking noise. Not like a twig breaking, more like something inside it had snapped but didn't seem to bother it. I don't even remember deciding to move. I just started yelling random stuff. "Hey, get back!" Trying to sound bigger than I was, my arms up, chest out, the way you're supposed to scare off a bear. It stopped, tilted its head, then took another step. Still no sound. Still that same slow, deliberate movement, like it was in no hurry. Like it knew it was going to reach me eventually. I started backing up, careful not to turn fully around. Every step I took made the gravel crunch louder than I liked. My heart was hammering, fast and high in my chest, and I swear I could feel each beat in my throat. It followed me, perfectly mirrored steps. If I sped up, it sped up. If I slowed, it crept closer. And every time I got too low, leaned a little too far, it surged a little, like it was waiting for me to trip. It wasn't chasing me, it was guiding me. Like a sheepdog herding me down a path I didn't want to take. I spotted a rock just off the road, reached for it without fully crouching, and threw it as hard as I could. Missed by a mile, but the sound it made when it cracked against the limestone, that stopped it cold. It froze. Then slowly, without a sound, turned and slipped back into the trees like a shadow. Gone. Like it had never been there at all. I stood there breathing hard, cold sweat running down my back. Couldn't move for a while. My muscles felt locked up. But the trail curved back toward my truck, and the only way home was through. I grabbed more rocks, stuffed them into my pockets until they dragged at my shorts. Then I found a long cedar branch and yanked it from the ground. Wasn't sharp, but it was solid. Felt good to have something in my hands. The walk back was awful. Every bush looked like it might move. Every branch overhead felt like a place something could drop from. I kept my eyes on the sides of the road, scanning constantly. About a mile from where I'd parked, I saw movement again. But this time, it was 2 hunters. Older guys, rifles slung low, casual but alert. They were heading my direction. I almost shouted with relief. Called out to them, asked if they'd seen anyone strange up ahead. Tall guy, thin, moving weird. They exchanged a look, didn't say anything right away. Then one of them said, "You shouldn't be out here alone. Folks see things on this ridge." Always have. And that was it. No smirk, no joke. Just matter of fact. They walked with me the rest of the way. Didn't ask questions, didn't need to. When we hit the highway, I thanked them, climbed into my truck, and drove home like I was being chased, even though nothing followed. I didn't stop for gas, didn't grab food, just went straight home, locked the door, and sat on the couch with every light on until the sun came up the next day. I've never gone back to Widow's Spine. I was 20 years old the summer I ended up working on a land survey crew just outside a tiny desert town called Arvala, maybe 30 miles from Marfa if you're going by the kind of winding roads that don't show up on your GPS. It wasn't glamorous. The job was part of a state-funded property documentation project, basically going around taking inventory of old buildings, most of them abandoned ranches, empty storefronts, barns that hadn't seen a cow in 40 years. It was the kind of gig you take because it pays decent and includes mileage. I didn't mind it at first. Sure, the days were long and the sun felt like it was trying to bleach your bones from the outside in, but it was quiet work. You get a clipboard, a camera, and a checklist. You drive out to the middle of nowhere, walk around crumbling buildings, jot down notes like roof compromised or foundation visible, snap a few photos, and move on to the next one. It was monotonous, but there was something peaceful about it too. Until we hit that one house. It was supposed to be a basic survey, one ranch on a list of dozens, but it's the one that stuck with me. Changed the way I look at that whole part of Texas, honestly. We've been hearing about it all week without realizing it. Locals mentioned a property out west that they just didn't talk about. At first, it didn't register because everyone had their own way of skirting around it. Some called it the old Kleiner place. Others just said that stretch out by Dry Creek. You know how small towns are. They act like if they don't say the name out loud, it can't reach them. One bartender, Earl I think, got real still when he saw it on our clipboard. He squinted, wiped the same spot on the counter for a full minute, and then said, "That place don't keep still. You mark it down, sure, but don't stay past dusk." When we asked what he meant, he shook his head and said, "Some land out here, it remembers things." Then he changed the subject. So, of course, we brushed it off. I mean, I'd heard weirder stuff back in Dallas about supposedly cursed intersections and haunted Waffle Houses. I didn't think a crumbling ranch in the desert was going to be any different. There were 3 of us on the crew, me, Jamie, and Alina. We weren't exactly a crack team of paranormal investigators. Jamie was studying architecture and could freehand building outlines like he was born with a T-square in his brain. Alina was big into photography and historical documentation. She had a way of catching details, dates carved into beams, worn signage, broken weather vanes, that the rest of us wouldn't have noticed. And I was there because I needed the paycheck and had a half-decent eye for inventory. We pulled up to the property just as the sun was starting to flatten itself against the horizon. The dirt road leading in looked like it hadn't been driven on in years. Our tires kicked up so much dust that it floated in the air behind us like smoke. The house itself wasn't much to look at. A small, single-story rancher built out of pale stone blocks. No paint, no porch, just a square structure sitting on a bare patch of land. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and the windows were either boarded or broken. The barn behind it had caved in on itself, all rusted tin and splintered beams. Even the trees around the yard looked skeletal, twisted, brittle husks of mesquite that made it feel like the whole place had been scorched and then forgotten. Jamie stayed by the barn, sketching its layout and estimating damage. Alina took off around the house's perimeter, her camera already clicking. I went inside. The front door resisted, like it didn't want to open. It was swollen from decades of dry heat and warped just enough to stick in the frame. I had to put my shoulder into it before it finally creaked open. Inside, it was dead silent. No animal sounds, no bugs. Just that strange kind of stillness that makes you instinctively lower your voice, like you're in a room where something important used to happen. The living room was empty, except for an old rocking chair in the far corner. Its back was cracked, and it leaned at an angle like it had been used until it gave up. The walls were yellowed with time. A faded outline of a picture frame still clung to the plaster. I made a few notes, took a photo, and walked toward what I guessed had been the kitchen. And that's when I saw the jars. They were tucked into a cabinet, lined up so precisely it looked like someone had spent hours arranging them. Glass jars, all sealed with thick, crumbling wax. Maybe 40 of them, maybe more. They looked old, not just dusty, but the kind of old that feels deliberate, like they were meant to age in place. Each jar had a folded slip of paper inside. No labels, no markings on the outside, just paper. I pulled one out carefully and peeled away the brittle wax seal. Inside was a name, written in faded ink, and below it, a date, May of 1923. The handwriting looked shaky but not rushed. I checked another. Different name, different date. October 1911, then another, and another. Some of the dates went back before the house could have even existed. That's when I started to feel weird. Not scared exactly, just unsettled. Like I'd walked into a room that had been expecting someone else. I called out to Jamie, then to Alina. No answer. I stepped back toward the front door, only it wasn't there. The layout of the house had changed. The door I'd come through was gone, replaced by a narrow hallway I didn't remember seeing before. The hallway sloped downward, which made no sense. This house didn't have a basement, and the ground outside was completely flat. Still, I figured maybe I'd gotten turned around. It happens sometimes in older buildings. You take a wrong turn, or a shadow throws off your sense of direction. But the further I walked, the more the house didn't make sense. The walls got narrower, the angles felt wrong. Eventually, I ended up in this square room. No windows, no furniture, just a table against one wall. On the table were more jars. But these were different. The glass looked cleaner. The wax was newer. The papers inside were bright white, like they hadn't aged at all. One had the date of that very week written on it. Another had my first name on it, spelled correctly, in shaky pencil. Its lid was cracked. Dust had started to leak from the opening, forming a little trail along the table. I felt my chest tighten. My skin prickled like I was standing too close to something electrical. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and opened the crew chat. Before I could even type, a message appeared. It wasn't from Jamie or Alina. It was from a contact named just Ranch. It said, "Don't leave." There was no cell service out there. We had tried to send pictures to our supervisor earlier in the week, and they'd failed to deliver. That message had no business arriving. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, boots dragging lightly over wood. I turned. There was a figure in the corner. Tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat, dusty like he'd just walked out of a sandstorm. His face was lost in shadow. He didn't speak, didn't move, just lifted one hand and pointed toward the jar with my name on it. I didn't wait. I ran. Whatever logic the house had been following fell apart as I moved. The hallway twisted, narrowed, then suddenly opened up into what was left of the barn. I stumbled out into the dry light. Jamie and Alina were already there, yelling my name. They looked terrified. Jamie said he'd seen me walk behind the barn and disappear. Said I'd never gone into the house at all. Alina backed him up. She was pale, hands clenched around her camera. They said it was like I'd just vanished. We didn't finish the survey, didn't even discuss it. We got in the truck, turned it around, and left without speaking for most of the drive. That night, I barely slept. I kept looking at the window in the motel room like someone might be standing outside of it, holding something. The next morning, our supervisor called. He sounded irritated, more confused than angry, asked which of us had gone back to the property during the night. Said the caretaker found a jar sitting on the porch, sealed, with my last name written on the paper inside. Neat handwriting, fresh ink. None of us had gone back. We asked to be reassigned, and thankfully they agreed. The rest of the summer, I worked in town libraries, old city halls, even a museum. Places with people, electricity, and noise. I didn't complain once. But on the last day, when I had to drive out toward the highway to head home, I passed that turnoff again. Just once more. It was broad daylight. I told myself there was nothing to worry about. Just dirt and stone. But as I passed the property, I couldn't help glancing over. The porch was visible through the brush. There were more jars than before. Stacked higher now. I swear, one of them had its lid off. Dust was trailing down the steps like it was waiting for someone else to arrive. I didn't stop, didn't ask questions, and I've never gone back. I just finished a late delivery run for Landry's Co-op out past the edge of Larkspur, Texas. We were short a driver that week, and I'd picked up extra hours hauling bags of feed and mineral blocks to the bigger ranches out by the bluffs. Most nights I didn't mind the quiet, but that one dragged. I was exhausted, starving, and just wanted to get home and peel off my boots. So instead of swinging back through the highway like I was supposed to, I cut across County Road 9 Dead Horse Lane if you asked any of the old-timers. Saved me close to 30 minutes. Not that I was in a rush to be anywhere, but my knees were aching and my left tail light was out again. It's funny, I hadn't even thought about that road in years. Not until I turned onto it and saw the curve come into view. Everyone in town had a story about it. We used to joke about it when we were kids, daring each other to walk it at night, like idiots. But the older guys, the ones with permanent grease under their fingernails and boots older than I was, never joked. They always said the same thing: don't stop, don't even look too long. I remember hearing about an old ranch house tucked off the bend, the roof caved in like a mouth missing teeth, windows black as pitch. Some said it was cursed, built over Comanche burial grounds. Others swore whole families had vanished from there. I never bought any of it. Seemed like one of those local legends that just linger because no one bothers to correct it. But when I saw that silhouette against the dark, that same busted old house, the hair on my arms stood straight up. It looked worse than I remembered. Leaning off to one side, with the kind of wrong geometry that made your eyes ache just looking at it. The front fence had collapsed, but the dirt still remembered where it had stood. The whole place felt outlined, marked, like something had drawn a line around it. I slowed down without realizing. My foot eased off the gas. I stared a second too long, and I swear to God, it felt like something stared back. My chest got tight, like my ribs didn't fit anymore. Not panic exactly, just pressure. Thick, invisible, settling on my shoulders like someone had climbed in the cab behind me. I pressed the gas and kept moving. Didn't look in the rear view, didn't want to know what I might see. That night, back in my trailer, things started. Nothing dramatic at first. I was lying in bed, watching some late-night infomercial with the sound barely on, almost asleep. Then I heard it. A light, rhythmic ticking against the metal siding. Not loud, just enough to pull my attention. At first, I figured maybe it was a branch brushing the side, even though I knew damn well there were no trees on that wall. I'd cleared them months ago, after a raccoon got into my AC vent. But I didn't move, didn't get up. It was 1 in the morning, and I was too tired to deal with some creaking metal or loose shutter. So I turned up the TV a notch and waited it out. It stopped after a few minutes. I forgot about it. But the next night, it came back. Same time, same wall. Ticking, then light scratching. It was steady, too steady for an animal, too controlled, and it was right behind my head. Long strokes, like fingernails being dragged deliberately across the inside of the wall. I sat up, heart thudding, and stared at the paneling like I could see through it. Nothing, just drywall and shadows. It came back the next night, and the next, always between 1 and 3. By the 4th night, it was louder, sharper. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think. I tried banging the wall, thinking maybe some bird had nested up in the frame. Nothing flew out. No rustling. Just silence, and then the ticking started again, almost like a reply. About a week in, I got home after a late shift, sometime after 1, and the second I opened the front door, it hit. Scratching erupted all around me. Fast, loud, like claws raking every wall in unison. I froze just inside the entry, heart hammering, mouth dry. It was like something was pacing the outside of the trailer, dragging nails along the metal as it circled. I stumbled into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, tried to get a grip. When I stepped back into the bedroom, my quilt was on the floor. I stood there staring at it. I never leave the quilt like that. Even when I'm late or dead tired, I pull it up over the pillows. It was like someone had stood there and yanked it clean off. That was it for me. I grabbed my keys, slammed the door behind me, and drove to my cousin Dante's place across town. He opened the door half asleep in gym shorts and a t-shirt, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked. I told him everything. Tried to laugh it off as I said it, but the words came out thin. He squinted at me for a second, then just nodded and pulled out the futon mattress. "Say a prayer before you sleep, man," he said, "just in case." I slept like a rock that night, but I woke up feeling like I hadn't rested at all. The next evening, I drove back home just to check on things. Soon as my headlights hit the trailer, I felt sick. The fan was lying on its side, cord ripped clean from the socket, drawers open, papers all over the floor. Nothing missing, no signs of forced entry. But it was all wrong. Only the bedroom was touched. The rest of the place looked exactly how I'd left it. Like whatever it was, knew what mattered to me. I backed out, locked the door again, and spent the next week crashing on Dante's couch. My family started asking questions. First, it was playful. What's got you scared of your own house? But it got more serious when I told them what was happening. Uncle Nico just shook his head and said, "You brought something back with you." Aunt Carla muttered that I never went to church anyway, like the older ones did. Said maybe I didn't carry myself right. I thought it was superstitious, nonsense. But that night, before I slept, I whispered a short prayer anyway. And I kept praying. Every night, sometimes in the middle of the day when I was alone. The weird stuff didn't stop, but it slowed down. It started focusing on the bathroom next. I'd be brushing my teeth or scrolling on my phone, and the lights would flicker, then go out completely. A second later, one wall would shake, then the opposite side, then back again. The pounding moved too fast for any person to do, like it was testing how close it could get before I ran. But the shower was worse. I'd be standing there, eyes closed, rinsing off, and I'd hear slow, deliberate steps on the tile outside. The knob would twist, just slightly, even though I always locked the door. Sometimes the door would creak open a fraction, then shut again. Once, it slammed with such force the mirror cracked. I screamed, didn't even recognize my own voice. Then came a knock, sharp and heavy, right against the glass of the shower. I stopped using the bathroom after dark. Started driving into town to use the one at the diner on Ellison Street. Didn't care how weird it looked. Didn't care about the gas. It was better than being trapped in there. For a few days, things went quiet. I thought maybe it had passed. Then one night, around 3, I woke up on Dante's couch, throat dry. I rolled over and saw it, a porcelain doll, sitting on the pillow next to me, its left eye gone. Face cracked clean through like it had been dropped. I screamed. Dante came running in. His wife stood in the doorway staring. They swore they didn't own any dolls. Neither did their kids. We threw it out, burned it in the fire pit out back. I watched it melt, just to be sure. Few days later, I went back to my trailer. I had to know if it was over. Walked in slow. Everything smelled musty, quiet. Then I saw it. My poster of country singers, the one I'd had since high school, still hanging above the dresser. 3 long scratches across the middle. Deep, crooked, fresh. I just stood there staring when suddenly this sound like steel ripping into steel filled the room, high-pitched, piercing like it was inside my skull. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, then bang, bang. 2 massive hits shook the trailer, and then silence, dead silence. I remembered what those old drivers had said, how once it noticed you, it didn't let go. They never joked about that road, never went back. They said the land was wrong, that even looking too long was enough. I didn't take anything with me, didn't pack, just locked the door behind me, climbed into my truck, and drove. I was 20 when it happened. I just finished a long weekend at my aunt's place in Laredo and figured I'd drive back up to San Corbin overnight to beat the traffic and the heat. It was one of those classic Texas summer nights, still sweltering even after midnight, everything humming with that heavy silence only the desert can hold. The kind of heat that doesn't cool off, just settles in. I remember the roads being almost too quiet, not eerie at first, just big and empty. That stretch between towns was the kind of straight, lonely highway where your brain starts filling in shapes where there aren't any. But I wasn't nervous. I'd driven it before, and I had everything I needed. Full tank, coffee in a Denon metal thermos riding shotgun, and a decent playlist queued up on my phone. Well, until I lost signal 10 minutes out of town. Still, I felt fine. There's a kind of stubborn confidence you get when you're 20 and alone in your car. You tell yourself nothing can really go wrong, especially not out there, where there's nothing for miles but dust and brush. About an hour in, I hadn't passed a single other car. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. Even the usual glow from the occasional gas station or truck stop was gone, just that ribbon of asphalt stretching forward and backward into black. I remember thinking, this is kind of nice, peaceful in a way. Then I saw him, just a figure standing on the shoulder, right up against the white line. It was quick, maybe 5 seconds total as I approached and passed, but enough to register. He was wearing a long dark coat, one of those old-fashioned ones that goes past the knees, like something you'd see in a noir film, and a wide-brimmed hat, one of those deep, sloping ones that swallowed the top half of his face in shadow. He looked wrong for the setting, out of place, out of time. At first I figured, sure, just a hitchhiker. Plenty of folks end up stranded out here, but then I noticed something that made my hands tighten a little on the wheel. He didn't move, at all. No shuffle of weight, no wave, no step forward as my lights hit him. Just stood there with one arm half lifted like he was trying to thumb a ride but hadn't fully committed to it. His whole posture felt paused, like he'd been mid-motion when someone hit a freeze frame. I slowed slightly, more reflex than concern, but I never saw his face. That hat, it was tilted just perfectly to block any view of it, like someone had drawn a black line across where a face should be. I pushed the gas again, told myself not to dwell. Weird things happen when you're tired on the road. Your brain misfires, fills in blanks with ghosts and shapes from old movies and sleep-deprived nerves. Still, I didn't put the cruise control back on. Didn't sip my coffee, just kept driving with both hands on the wheel, suddenly very aware of the sound of my tires on the pavement. About 10 minutes later, I saw him again. Exact same silhouette. Same coat, same hat, same raised arm. Standing on the right side of the road just like before. But I hadn't turned, hadn't passed any junctions or loops. The road had been one straight, undisturbed line since the first sighting. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. No way I could have lapped him either. The speed I was doing, the stretch I'd covered, it didn't add up. This time, I didn't even glance over as I passed. I kept my eyes straight ahead, glued to the reflective dashes on the asphalt. But something inside me had shifted. A kind of low thrum started in my chest, like my body knew something I didn't. Like it was already reacting to a threat I couldn't explain yet. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I was starting to feel watched. The third time I saw him, I felt my stomach drop before I even processed what I was looking at. He was closer to the road now, right at the edge of the lane, just a few feet from where my tires would pass. And this time, just as I came up on him, the hat tilted upward, only slightly, just enough. What I saw underneath wasn't a face, not really. It was pale, but not in a normal way. It looked dry and flat, like sun-baked earth. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth surface that made my vision blur the longer I tried to look at it, like my brain couldn't make sense of what it was seeing. Then it snapped back into shadow, and I was past him again. My hands were slick on the wheel now. I kept wiping them on my jeans between turns, but they just kept sweating. I was starting to get cold despite the heat outside. A nervous kind of cold, the kind that crawls into your spine. I made a silent rule: don't stop. Not for anything. If the engine caught fire, I'd coast. If a tire blew, I'd drive on the rim. No pulling over. Not until I hit city lights again. I turned off the AC because suddenly it sounded too loud. I wanted silence, but the silence I got wasn't empty. At first it was just the usual hum of the car, the roll of tires, the rattle of something loose in the back. Then I started hearing a new sound, a whisper, low, constant, and too close. It wasn't outside. It wasn't from the radio either. I had shut that off miles back. It was right beside me. Passenger seat. Just this faint, steady murmur like someone muttering under their breath, right at the edge of audible. I froze. Didn't even look. Just stared ahead, breathing shallow. The whisper started to form words. Not full sentences, just pieces. Stop, let me, so tired, give. The thermos on the passenger seat shifted. Not from a bump in the road, this was deliberate. It slid toward me about an inch, then rolled slightly before settling back. I didn't think, didn't reason it out. I reached over without turning and slapped it to the floor. The whispering stopped, just cut off. Gone. I exhaled through my teeth, trying to calm down. And then, for some absolutely stupid reason, I looked in the rearview mirror. He was in the back seat. Hat, coat, that same damn posture. Not moving, not making a sound, just sitting there with his head bowed slightly forward. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel him looking. My body reacted before my brain did. I swerved, hard. The car screamed against the asphalt, fishtailed a little, and nearly took me into the ditch. I fought the wheel back, heart slamming against my ribs. When I finally got the car straight again, I looked. The back seat was empty. Totally, terrifyingly empty. But I didn't feel better. I didn't feel safe. I felt like he was still there, just somewhere I couldn't see. Somewhere between the seats, or behind my next blink. I drove the rest of the way hunched forward, like that would somehow help. Didn't touch the coffee again. Didn't blink more than I had to. Every few minutes I had to fight the urge to check the mirror. I was so sure he'd be there again, sitting quietly, waiting. When I finally saw the orange haze of San Corbin bleeding into the night sky, I could have cried. I didn't even go home right away. I got off the highway and found a random neighborhood. Just rows of small houses and chain-link fences, and parked under the glow of a flickering street lamp. I shut off the engine and sat there with both hands gripping the wheel, like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I didn't move until the sun started to rise. Later that morning, I mentioned it to this guy I worked with. Real casual, like it was just a weird dream or something I half imagined during the drive. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. He just looked at me for a beat and said, "Sounds like El Sombreron." Said it like it was the weather. Then added, "People say he waits out there. If you pass him and don't stop, he follows." I asked him what happens if someone does stop. He looked away and shook his head. No one who does comes back to talk about it. I didn't ask anything else. I just nodded. And from that day on, I've taken the long way around. Every time. I will never drive that stretch of Texas highway after dark again. It was that part of summer where time stops mattering. No school, nothing scheduled, just long, hot days that blur together. My Uncle Ray had this piece of land way out past Bell Ridge, tucked near a stretch of woods that seemed to go on forever. You couldn't see another house from his porch, not even the faint glow of a neighbor's porch light at night. Just trees, fields, and more silence than felt normal. One morning over cereal, he said he had a job for me, clearing out an old shed at the far edge of the property. Said it'd been there since before he was born, way back when the land belonged to our great-grandfather. It was barely standing, held together by habit and nails too rusted to remember what their job was. Roof sagging, walls bowing like someone had leaned on them too long. He told me it was packed with junk and wanted it emptied before it finally gave in and collapsed. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it sounded boring, sure, but he said he'd pay me a couple $100 to get it done over the weekend. And at 15, that was a solid deal. So I agreed. I remember walking out there for the first time, down a narrow dirt path that started to disappear about halfway in. The grass was knee-high, the air was still, and everything felt kind of forgotten. You know how some places just have that abandoned weight to them? Even when you're the only person around, you feel like you're being watched? Yeah, that. The shed looked worse up close. Like if I so much as sneezed too hard, the whole thing would fold in on itself. But the padlock on the door caught my attention. It was old. Green with rust, but still holding tight. Ray gave me the key from this drawer in the kitchen that was overflowing with batteries, dead lighters, mystery screws, and a half-used roll of duct tape. When I popped the lock and opened the door, the hinges whined like they'd forgotten how to move. Dust exploded into the air like it had been saving up. It smelled like old paper and rot and something else I couldn't place at the time, something sharp, like metal and mildew mixed together. Inside was chaos. Stacks of boxes, rusted tools, bent shelves, broken crates, just layer upon layer of forgotten stuff. It looked like someone had started packing it up at some point and then just gave up. I grabbed the first box near the door, full of bent nails and busted hinges, and brought it out to dump near the fence line. That's when I noticed something carved into the inside wall, just above where the box had been sitting. I stepped back in for a better look. They weren't names or random scratchings. They were symbols, circles drawn over and over, stacked on top of each other, triangles woven through the circles, lines that were too clean, too exact, to be anything casual. I remember thinking it looked more like someone had been etching them, not just doodling, and they weren't just in one spot. Once I noticed them, I kept spotting more on the beams, the support posts, even under the dusty shelves. Perfect little symbols carved deep into the wood. I figured maybe an older cousin had done it as a joke years ago, maybe even Grandpa back when he was young and weird and bored. But then, I thought about the lock again, how stiff it had been, how the dust hadn't looked disturbed, how nothing in that shed looked like anyone had been in there for years. That night over dinner, I asked Ray about it. He chewed slower than usual and looked out the window. Said he hadn't opened that shed since our grandfather died, and even then, he hadn't really gone through it. He just locked it and left it alone. The next day, I brought a flashlight. I told myself I was just curious. Wanted to see what else was carved on the walls. But truthfully, I had that tight feeling in my gut, like the one you get when you're walking into a room that's supposed to be empty, but you're not entirely sure. The light cut through the dust better than I expected. That's when I saw them. Bones. Small ones, maybe from birds or squirrels or something like that, hanging from the rafters on pieces of string. They weren't just hanging randomly, they were arranged. Some in crosses, some in tight circles. One looked like a small ladder made of spine fragments. It was careful, like someone had put real thought into the design. When the beam of the flashlight hit them, they clattered together just slightly. Not much, just enough to make sound, and there was no breeze in there. Not even a draft. My stomach turned. I dropped the box I'd been holding and stepped back, hitting my shoulder on a beam. For a second, I just stood there, staring at the bones. I didn't move until I was outside the shed again, breathing hard like I'd just run laps. I told myself maybe hunters used the place. Maybe it was a weird kind of trap or display, but that didn't make sense. Why the symbols? Why the careful patterns? Why seal the place up and leave it untouched? That night I stayed in Ray's guest room, upstairs above the garage. The window looked out over the field. You could just barely see the tree line if you squinted. He went to bed around 10. I stayed up, scrolling my phone, trying to shake the image of those bones. Around midnight, I started drifting off, and then I heard it, a light, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was on the bedroom door, but then I realized it was coming from the window. I sat up slowly. The room was quiet, too quiet, and the tapping kept going, soft, even, no wind, no rain, just tap, tap, tap. Thing is, the window was on the second floor, and there weren't any trees nearby. I walked over and pulled back the curtain, expecting to see a branch, maybe a bird, but there was nothing, just blackness, and the tapping had stopped. Right as I started to exhale, there was this long scraping sound down the side of the house, like claws or nails, slow and steady. I stood frozen with the curtain bunched in my fist, heart pounding in my ears. Then it stopped. I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket up to my neck. Didn't sleep much. The next morning I went outside. There were no tracks, no scratches in the dirt, nothing under the window. It looked untouched, like nothing had been there at all. Later that day I went back to the shed. Something fell off before I even opened the door. The air felt heavier. The symbols looked darker, somehow, deeper, like someone had sharpened them overnight. And the bones, they weren't where I remembered them. They had moved. shifted. They weren't hanging randomly anymore. Now they were shaped like a person, arms out, head tilted sideways. I didn't step inside, just backed away, slowly, and shut the door. When I told Ray, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he sighed, told me there'd always been stories about that shed. Kids daring each other to sleep in it, no one making it till dawn. I laughed, sort of, but he looked serious. Said he didn't believe in all that, but still, he never touched the place. Said it felt wrong. That afternoon, we went out together, started digging through the back corner, and that's when we found the chair. It was old, splintered, and facing the wall like someone had been forced to stare at it. Ropes still tied to the arms, frayed but intact. Like they were waiting. The floor beneath it was stained, dark, like something had soaked deep into the wood long ago. Ray cursed, slammed the door shut, and nailed it closed right in front of me. Didn't say a word the whole walk back. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak in the pipes made me flinch. Every bark from the dogs outside sounded like a warning. At sunrise, I packed my bag, left a note, and walked out without breakfast. Didn't look back. Didn't visit for a long time after that.